So, as you can see, through all of these processes, it truly is carbohydrates that are deciding what gets burned and what gets stored. Carbohydrates are the main factor here. What I'm talking about with carbohydrates is blood glucose, okay? So how much glucose is available in the body is a huge determining factor of whether or not body fat is stored in the form of triglycerides. So even if you're eating a very low-fat diet, the body will not bother breaking apart your stored triglycerides if you have an abundance of glucose floating around in your bloodstream at all times. In that case, there is literally zero reason to burn fat. There's excess glucose, too much glucose. Now, when there's too much glucose, hormones come into play, and insulin is released. Fat burning is essentially shut off. And then I'm going to teach you about the hormones that make all of this happen. So you learn the basics of anabolism and catabolism, the basics of human metabolism. That's really what we went through there. But these things, they're basically told what to do by signals. If you guys remember, when I did the hormone episode, I talked about text messages, right? So you have like one cell phone that sends a text message to another cell phone, right? So this is sending a signal that is a hormone, and then this cell phone is a receptor for that hormone, right? So you might have like an insulin receptor or a glucagon receptor that's receiving a message from a hormone. So the hormones are constantly telling the body what to do. Now, I'm basically going to talk about two main hormones tonight, and that's it, okay? I'm going to talk about two. I'm going to mention an enzyme briefly. So the enzyme that I want to mention real briefly is called lipase. Now, so I'm using the word enzyme, right? So an enzyme is literally just a substance produced in the body that is like what they call the catalyst for a chemical reaction. So it's the catalyst that makes something happen, a biochemical reaction in the body. What lipase does, lipase is an enzyme that breaks apart triglycerides. So something that you probably need to know, lipase breaks apart triglycerides. That's awesome because it means you're probably burning body fat, right? So lipase probably plays a huge role in ketosis, let's say, breaking apart these fatty acids so they can be converted to acetoacetate and beta-hydroxybutyrate, which are ketones. Biochemistry. All right, so I can leave lipase there, that's cool. We'll hang out there. Let's talk about hormones, okay? So I'm gonna talk about these two main hormones, insulin and glucagon. These are the two we're gonna talk about tonight, okay? Because they play probably the biggest role in this anabolism, catabolism, human metabolism story, okay? So insulin is a storage hormone. Repeat that. Insulin is a storage hormone. Insulin is the main storage hormone in the human body. What insulin does is shuttles glucose into fat cells and muscle cells. So if you're low on muscle glycogen, insulin can shuttle glucose into your muscle cells. You guys may have seen me hack this before in terms of biohacking. If I do that really crazy ARX workout, which I'm doing tomorrow actually, if I do really crazy ARX workout where I blast out all my muscle glycogen, that means that my muscle cells are going to be more insulin sensitive. They're going to be screaming at insulin to give them more glucose because they want to refill that glycogen, okay? So insulin shuttles glucose into muscle cells and shuttles them into fat cells depending on what's happening in the body at that moment in time, okay? So this is the way that insulin actually regulates blood glucose levels. Again, it's carbohydrates and glucose in the body that determines a lot of these processes. So what it does to regulate the blood glucose is it sends the signal, and the muscle cells and the fat cells get this signal, they're insulin receptors, that it's time to absorb glucose from the bloodstream. Too much glucose in the bloodstream, you gotta pull some out, okay? So it's pulling free-floating glucose out of the bloodstream because there's too much. The thing is, insulin will continue to tell the body to do this over and over and over nonstop until blood glucose levels are back to safe levels, which we're gonna talk about in a second. I'm gonna draw a diagram for you. I think it's really gonna help you wrap your brain around this, okay? So muscle cells, like we said, they have a limit, around 400 grams in the entire body. Fat cells have no limit. There's literally no limit to how many triglycerides can be stored in your fat cells. Go watch the TV show My 600-Pound Life, or go to Disney World for an afternoon and you'll see exactly what I mean, right? Fat cells have no limit. So once your glycogen is, your liver glycogen, your muscle glycogen is filled up, it's only going to fat cells. That's it, okay? And that is why it's so much easier to look like an obese person than it is to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, to look like Arnold in his prime, right? It's a lot harder to look like a bodybuilder than it is to look like an obese person because of this weird situation that we have where fat cells are really, really good at storing energy, and it's a limitless store of energy, okay? So again, the glucose is stored in fat cells as triglycerides. So as long as there is insulin in the bloodstream telling the cells to take up glucose, the fat cells will not break apart any triglycerides and will not release any glucose or fatty acids to be burned for fuel. In simple terms, insulin stops fat burning dead in its tracks. If there is insulin in your bloodstream, you are not burning fat, period. What raises insulin? Mostly carbohydrates. Weird. Okay, moving on. Glucagon is the second hormone we're talking about. Now, glucagon regulates the release of glycogen. It strips muscle glycogen to put glucose into the bloodstream as needed so that you have glucose to burn if the body requires glucose. In the case of CrossFit or this ARX workout I'm talking about, or boxing or sprinting, something extremely glycolytic where you need to burn glucose, then glucagon is going to send a signal for the muscle cells to release glycogen, which spits glucose out into the bloodstream to be used for energy, okay? So what that's doing, again, is regulating blood sugar. So glucagon increases blood glucose concentrations by releasing it from storage, floods the bloodstream with glucose ready to be used for energy. Now, if the demand for energy is higher than the glucose can meet, so let's say, I'll give you an example. Let's say you fasted 16 hours, right? And your liver glycogen is like good and depleted. And you decide that you're gonna go for a walk. You're gonna go walk a mile, or you're gonna walk for 20 minutes even, right? Then the body needs energy, but not right away, because that's not glycolytic. Now you're talking about aerobic activity. We have plenty of time. You don't need the energy immediately. You can use oxygen. So that is when the body will break apart triglycerides and use them for energy, and those fatty acids can get converted into ketones. You have plenty of time for that process to happen. Then you can burn the ketones for energy, which is why doing aerobic activity, not glycolytic, doing aerobic activity fasted can really, really help you burn fat. If you're doing any kind of intermittent fasting, if you fast 13 hours a day, 16 hours a day, whatever, try going for a walk with a thermos full of black coffee, then come back and jump in a cold shower. You'll be a fat burning machine, I assure you. That is a fast track to burning body fat, okay? So I'm gonna give you guys a really quick demonstration of how this works, and then I'm